Well, welcome. We are very glad to have you all here. It's just lovely to see people at the Kerouac house. It's really lovely. My name is Jana Benj, and I'm the president of the Kerouac Project. And just to let you know, I have a New Zealand accent that I'm speaking in, so you don't have to spend the whole time wondering if I'm South African or Australian, which people normally do. This is our first public event since COVID, and so we're very glad that you ventured out. Above all, the Kerouac Project of Orlando is a community, and as you can imagine, as all of you are feeling too, it's very hard to maintain a community during COVID. While we're on COVID, we won't be giving general tours of the house or being in the house like we normally do because of that. But if you want to go through here, which I understand is a bit obvious, it's kind of sets you up. But if you need to use the bathroom, there's one in the back, and there's sanitizer there too. So, there's the front and back doors. Okay, so the back door is open too. Even though the light isn't so good, so probably use the front door and go through to the back if you need to do that. So why are we called the Kerouac Project? Well, Jack Kerouac lived and wrote in the back portion of this house between 1958 and 1959. He wrote the Dharma Bums while he was here, and it was from here that he went to New York after the review of On the Road came out. He left here in obscurity, and he returned the darling of the Beat generation and a rising star. Fast forward, 20 years ago, a group of local people met together to buy this house and rescue it from demolition and turn it into something that would add value to College Park, Orlando, and as it turned out, to many other parts of the world. Today, the Kerouac Project has 3 goals. The first goal is to host 4 residents from the United States and around the world. These are poets, writers, and playwrights who our selection committee believe have real talent and could benefit from a peaceful place to think and write. And I think anyone who lives in College Park would agree that that's what we can provide here. Our second goal is to send those residents out into the community in whatever area they feel comfortable. We've formed many literary arts and educational alliances through the years, and we love it when our residents bring their fresh new perspectives to our literary community. To that end, we hold writing workshops, readings, and other collaborative events here and at other venues. There is tremendous value in a strong literary community. I was thinking of that when I watched the presidential inauguration and got to hear Amanda Gorman, the 27-year-old, recite her astonishing poem, The Hill We Climb. I later read that Amanda did not grow up with what we would traditionally call a privileged environment, but I would refute that. She was privileged to be able to take part in many youth writing workshops and writing circles in Los Angeles, which nurtured her and helped her grow her stunning talents. Our third goal is to protect and maintain this old house in honor of the legacy of Jack Kerouac. It is the only literary establishment in Orlando that is on the National Registry of Historic Places. I'm proud to say that it is right on 100 years old and one of the oldest homes in this community. However, that is the good news, that it's 100 years old. The bad news is that it's 100 years old. And it needs significant work, mainly at the back of the house where Jack lived, which is this enclosed porch area. The foundations, which are just concrete blocks on sandy soil, continue to sink. If you do use the bathroom out there, you will note that there's a 3-degree angle on the floor, which doesn't sound much till you try playing marbles on it, but... As a board, we have recently committed to the daunting task of shoring up this house for the next 100 years. This involves, among other things, lifting the house up 6 feet, installing the proper piling, returning it back down to the ground, and then redoing the plumbing and wiring, and probably replacing many of the fragile 100-year-old, I don't know what you call them, but equivalent to sheetrock things that are slowly sort of drifting down the walls. To that end, we are currently about to begin new initiatives which include a membership program, individual giving campaigns, and aggressively pursuing foundations, corporate and public funds that are marked for organizations like ours. As I've said, this is a daunting task, and we would love it if you would come along and help us. You can sign up for our newsletter, which many of you have done, and check us out on Kerouac Project of Orlando on our website. You can see our social media on Facebook at Kerouac Project. You can share our upcoming programs, take a brochure with you, and learn a little more about us. And if you have any specific ideas of how to help us reach our new goal, please talk to me afterwards. Together, we are hoping that we can make this house ready for another 100 years of being part of our literary community here in College Park. With that said, I would like to welcome Gwen Mullins from Chattanooga, Tennessee. And Gwen came to us during COVID, but she drove herself down, so that was good. It was like one less hurdle. How do we get her from the airport to the house? So we're grateful for that. She's been a very quiet resident, but I don't know how you'd be anything else. So I don't actually. Well, they have people around, and I don't know how we would know if you're rowdy or not when you're in social isolation. But she's been a really good resident and done some work on Zoom when she can. She's worked with Valencia College and the students there. And she's been outlining her second novel and going over parts of her first novel. So I'd just like to say welcome and have the stage.
Our shenanigans have been quiet. All right. So I do want to thank everybody, the Kerouac Foundation, the College Park Orlando community, you guys who are here tonight, for creating such like a comfortable, supportive space. I know you talked about sort of the failing foundations and some of the things that are happening as the house ages, but to me that felt like home because I live in a 100-year-old home. So things are a little quirky, and this felt like home to me. So after 3 months of being alone with just my words, I've had some progress with new work and revisited some older work. But I do want to especially thank Jeff and Jana and John King and Barbara and Mona and all the folks who have checked in and just made sure I'm okay. I've never lived alone. Jenna and I were just talking about that, and I realized that when I consider myself living alone, I had a daughter. That's not alone. And this has been exquisite. So I'm going to read a short excerpt from a piece I've been working on. It's going to come out in the spring, but it's kind of heavy, and I didn't want to read a lot of it tonight. So I'm going to read an excerpt from it, and then I'm going to read from an older piece that's a little more fun for Valentine's Eve, if inappropriate. Okay. So this is sort of a character study excerpt from the second novel that I've been working on and that I've spent some time working on here. Even when Jackson was a little boy, Red and Loretta argued over how to raise him, when to discipline, what was normal, what was not. The day 10-year-old Jackson slammed a length of firewood against his little sister's head because she misplaced one of his Matchbox cars, Red grabbed Jackson by the arm and dragged him to his room. Jackson howled and kicked the bedroom door while blood dripped into little Rosie's eyes and onto the carpet. If Loretta had not been a quick-thinking nurse with a supply of butterfly closures and medical-grade superglue, Rosie might have needed stitches. After Rosie was patched up and Jackson was permitted to leave his room, the boy made a show of bringing cups of milk to his sister while she lay on the couch watching cartoons. When Jackson leaned over Rosie to adjust her pillow, he whispered something that made her shake her head and push away from him. Red could convince neither Jackson nor Rosie to tell him what he said. What did Red know about raising a good boy, a good man? It was a miracle he himself had not turned out like his own father. As the children grew, Red doted on Rosie, the baby, while Loretta ran point on raising their son. The coldness in Jackson's eyes always chilled Red, but he blamed himself for not being able to love his son as much as he should have. When he was a boy, Red's uncles had taken him on hunting trips, picking up some of the slack left by his own father. Red remembered these hunts for the closeness they forged between men and boys in the woods, a closeness that tied him to his family and the land, but that no one ever spoke of in living rooms or around kitchen tables. When Jackson was 12, Red took him on a hunting trip with his old Uncle Frank and some of his McClendon cousins. "It's okay if you don't want to pull the trigger," Red told Jackson. "It's hard, especially the first time." Red explained that deer were overpopulating the area, and as long as they processed the meat, they were doing right by them, helping the remaining deer to survive. This rationale was the same provided to Red by his Uncle Frank when Red had been a boy, and it helped him through his first hunt. Even though tears had filled Red's eyes when he looked through the scope into the liquid brown eyes of a young buck for the first time, he aimed true, squeezed the trigger. Jackson nodded grimly as Red talked, stayed silent as they waited in the blind in the woods during the last days of the season. But Jackson did not hesitate or cry when the doe was in his sights, had actually smiled just before he squeezed the trigger. When Red showed Jackson how to field dress the deer, blood streaking his face and arms, Jackson laughed at the sucking, ripping sound of the hide pulling away from sinew and muscle, whistled with unsolemn delight when the steaming, glistening slop of intestines spilled from the deer's warm carcass. Uncle Frank and the cousins looked sidelong at Jackson, their lips tight, the lonesome, cold closeness of men in the woods fractured by Jackson's mirth. Red and Loretta hoped Jackson would outgrow his fits of rage, the way he barked and snarled when he didn't get his way, like the time he hurled his pet hamster Lolly against the wall, after Loretta insisted he clean out the animal's stinking cage. When Rosie received too much attention, Jackson would slip behind her, whisper something only she could hear until she shook her head and her eyes grew wide with terror. Once, Red thought he heard Jackson whisper, "You smell like a dog's cunt." But both kids refused to divulge what Jackson said. Red found that he could not repeat what he thought he heard, so again, he let the matter drop. By the time Jackson was a teenager, it seemed he had matured, calmed down. He projected a steady, unnerving calm that even his teachers commented on. "Such a serious young man," Miss Fitzsimmons said, rubbing her hands together and avoiding Red and Linda's eyes during the annual parent-teacher conference. "Always so watchful." Red hoped that his boy was good, but he did not believe it in his heart. Something tingled at the back of his throat when he observed his slope-shouldered son, like a nagging sickness he could never quite shake. Okay, that's the sad, depressing. Like, I skipped the part where they kill a dog, so you're welcome. You're welcome. Yes. Okay, this one is inappropriate in hopefully all the best ways. This one is called The Vice Principal Story. I wrote it a few years ago, and it's fun to read, and I hope you like it. The Vice Principal Story. Oh, for the record, this is a work of fiction, and I've never worked in a school system. Well, I work at a college now, but that's neither here nor there. Anyway, this is called The Vice Principal Story. A new lover opens you up, puts you back on the sex radar with some sort of chemical reaction that changes posture, the hardness of nipples, and the glance that lasts a beat longer than it should. Such a small thing, really, the way fingertips brush against a sleeve. Some scientists talk about pheromones, but I always think of it as an invisible open sign, as observable as flickering neon in a store window. I was not always so obviously open, but when I was, I saw the effects everywhere, in all sorts of forms, dripping off a girdled woman in the elevator, steaming up from a balding golfer having drinks and joking with his waitress, blazing from the skin of kids at my school. It doesn't have anything to do with being young or thin or beautiful, for which I'm grateful. I am none of those things, or at least not anymore, but still the boy worshipped me, and for a while I owned him. I am the vice principal of Riverside High School. My husband, Martin, is the school superintendent of the next county. Heath is in college, and he was almost 18 and a Riverside student when I first slept with him. I've seen the news stories about those lonely, predatory teachers, and I know what people are saying about Samantha Calhoun, but it wasn't that way with me and Heath. I don't like to remember that Heath is younger than my own son, and I used to tell him that he has an old soul. He told me I have a great mouth, and we spent hours kissing and looking into each other's eyes. I remember idle hours of skin worship with my first lover years ago when I was the age my students are now. Speaking of students, and I am convinced that the young are alluring not just because of their firm skin, but rather due to being newly, freshly fucked. Virginity pleasantly lost emanates the need for more touch, like white snow with only a single set of footprints. Of course, Heath wasn't a virgin when I met him, but he might as well have been. I read somewhere about a tribe or a dead culture where certain women were selected to initiate and teach boys how to become lovers and, by extension, how to become men. Sometimes I think I could have been one of those women. My son Jamie was 19 when he left, so I didn't consider him a runaway. He left a note that read, "I've had enough school, I'll be in touch." While Jamie was on the road, in his own version of a Kerouac meets Christopher McCandless adventure, and my husband Martin was making his venerable presence known all across the county, I was left with long hours and evenings all to myself. I ate popcorn for dinner and read vampire novels. I missed and envied Jamie, and I look forward to the postcard he sent on the 15th of every month. One month he was in Boise, out to see the world, and ended up in Boise. Go figure. One night, long after our affair began, Heath called the house. Long before our affair began, Heath called the house asking to write a recommendation for him for some college. Students rarely called the house. We talked. It was easy to slip into a light banter, almost a casual flirting. When we hung up, I stood and looked into my gilded vanity mirror. I didn't look 20 years younger, but I did look a little more awake than I usually do after 9 o'clock. My cheeks were flushed, my eyes gone dark the way Martin used to say they do when I'm in the mood. I wondered what my first lover would think if he saw me in the days before the affair. A school administrator with hair that I forgot to color until the gray was more obvious than the brown. I wore the same black shoes 4 days out of 5. Perhaps it was imagining myself through his eyes, or maybe it was just the pervasiveness of my escalating boredom that forced me into the hairdresser's. A cut and color, a new skirt, the high heels from the back of the closet. I should have taken a before and after picture. Nobody tells a vice principal she looks pretty. Sometimes not even her own husband. On Monday after fall break, I was on crossing guard duty. 8 in the morning, and already I was remembering why I wore plain shoes with low heels. Heath looked at me in the way boys look at girls, not the way boys avoid looking at administrators. "Miss Lawson, do you have to go to a funeral or something?" he said. "Get to class," I said. I stood up straighter, waved cars past. I heard him say, "Damn," low and quiet as he walked away. I blushed, then blushed that I blushed. High heels, what was I thinking? I had to walk a couple of miles a day back and forth across the school and parking lots into classrooms. Some of the boys and the teachers noticed my new look, just like some, not all, not nearly all, used to. I like them noticing. Our school is smallish, and sometimes I do guidance counselor work during that application crunch for seniors in November. It was in this capacity that Heath came to me with SAT scores in one hand, college apps in the other. He was better than average, but not a great student, in the top 20% of his class. He played basketball, and his hands were wide and strong enough to palm the ball. I noticed his hands more than his test scores when he lay his papers on my desk. When I reached for him, the papers, not his hands, I let his finger brush against my wrist. I let it linger. He noticed, I know he did, and he grinned. I pressed my knees together and looked at the screen, which was still clocking, the little dial spinning and loading data. "I read all the time. What kind of job can I get doing that?" he said. We're not talking about jobs just yet. We're talking about college. Let your college counselor talk about jobs, I said. So, you're a reader? I didn't know that. I don't tell a lot of people, he said. Heath's transcripts were on the screen. C's in math, A's in English, B's in most everything else. I should have talked to him about liberal arts colleges and state universities. What are you reading now? I said. This book called The Fountainhead? Have you heard of it? I nodded. I crossed and uncrossed my legs. We talked about Howard Rourke and Ayn Rand until the bell rang and he had to go to his next class, so I scheduled us to meet again the following week. Next time, we'll actually talk about college. I promise, I said. I didn't keep my promise. My husband Martin reads biographies, periodicals on education administration, watches the History Channel. In college, when we first met, I thought he was an intellectual. Heath decided to apply to Georgia State University an hour south of here. Our meetings were 30 or 40 minutes, and he started asking me to read his papers for English. One Friday night, when Martin had traveled to Atlanta for a weekend superintendent's conference, someone knocked at our back door. I was alarmed at first since it was after dark and no one used that entrance except family. A wild, hopeful thought. Jamie slipping in at supper time, come home just before Thanksgiving, my favorite holiday. Last year dragged on bleak without him, sitting at a table with only Martin and my mother, spooning pale gravy with its unforgiving lumps over potatoes gone cold from being done too early. When I answered the door, Heath had already taken a couple steps back, his face half covered in shadow. He stepped into the light from the open door and batted a moth away from his head. His hands were wide and veined. Moths and bronze beetles fluttered around us. Come in before half the backyard flies in, I said. He stepped in and looked past me. My dinner had been a brownie sundae and 2 gin and tonics. The bottle of gin and puckering lime wedges sat on the side of the island, and fudge sauce had run down the side of the sundae bowl. My high heels lay by the door where I'd kicked them off as soon as I'd walked over the threshold. Dessert? He said. That was dinner, I admitted. We stood together in the kitchen. If he had been older, I would have offered him a drink. If he had been younger, I would have offered him ice cream. I'm not sure I can be Mrs. Robinson, I said. Who's Mrs. Robinson? He said. Cuckoo cuckoo, I said, but he was already kissing me. Do you remember what it's like to have a new lover? How your skin sings and your hair seems to fall in place and you're hungry but don't care to eat, and you spend too much time thinking about what underwear to put on every morning? It turns out I missed that feeling even more than I missed teaching. Heath was gone before midnight, so he could be home in time for curfew. I don't know how I would have felt if he had spent the night, if the word curfew hadn't called attention to his age and by extension to mine. He was eager, and the first time was over quickly. The second time was not. I reveled in the regenerative ability of the young lover, the glory of the encore performance. I tried not to think of my own son out in the world, coiled with girls or women he had met along the way. Jamie's bank statements were still mailed to the house, and I sometimes opened them to see his savings account dwindling, but slowly. He was smart, really, to set himself free while he still could. A while ago, I got a postcard from Montreal, so I learned my son had a passport and could travel anywhere in the world. Heath and I would meet at my house, never at school except for once in late May when most of the seniors barely graced classes except to meet the minimum attendance requirements. That afternoon, it was the end of the day, the last Friday before graduation, and Heath caught me leaving my office. He pushed me back in. We had sex standing against the door, which didn't lock, my skirt hiked up around my waist. He tore my panties, and I could tell by the way he looked pleased with himself afterward that he'd planned this encounter. I adjusted my skirt and told him that it could never happen again, at least not at school. My time with Heath lasted the rest of that year and into the summer, that bittersweet summer before college, when parents give up discipline and curfews, reasoning he'll be on his own soon enough. Once in midsummer, I woke up in a hotel with him, and the sun had melted, and Martin was supposed to be home in time for dinner. I washed between my legs with a damp cloth at the hotel sink and reapplied my lipstick. I left in such haste that I forgot my earrings. Martin and Jamie had given me the earrings 3 years ago for my birthday, little freshwater pearls on a silver thread. I didn't have time to go back. Martin was supposed to be home any minute. In fact, I was surprised I beat him there. I went in and changed. I chopped onions and chicken for a curry. Martin didn't come home until 9, and by that time I'd eaten, and the rice had gone gluey. I was cross, not because he missed dinner, but because I could have returned for my earrings. I felt like it was Martin's fault that I'd lost my favorite pieces of jewelry. The last time I saw Heath was when I visited him at college. I wore a hat and sunglasses and was going to meet him in his dorm, but I couldn't remember his room number, so I asked some kid in the hall if he knew where Heath was. The kid walked me to his room, then knocked on the door and said, "Heath, your mom's here." Heath answered the door in his pajama pants, no shirt. "Hey, Mom, come on in," he said. He grabbed me by the wrist and pulled me into the room and locked the door behind us, then turned to kiss my neck. He had learned so much. Having a younger lover had made me feel older, not younger. After we made love, we lay naked, his leg hooked over mine in the twin bed, a sheet tangled over us and between us. I told him I couldn't see him anymore. I told him Jamie had written to say he was moving home. I didn't tell him I suspected Martin was involved with a math teacher in one of his own county schools. "You need to date girls your own age," I said. "I do," he said, "but not like this." He stroked my thigh. It would have been easy to stay, but I got up and dressed. Heath pulled on pants and sat on the edge of the bed. "Was I wearing earrings when I got here?" I said. "No, but..." He walked over to his dresser and opened the top drawer. "I should have given these back to you a while ago." My lost pearls lay in his palm. I took them and let my hand linger on his. I went home to patch my family up and set my school in order. The next week, we fired Samantha Calhoun for having sex with her 12th grade student when she was supposed to be tutoring him in physics. When she came into the principal's office and saw us there, she was already crying. Apparently, the boy's mother had found out and would have pressed charges if the kid hadn't been 18. I brought up my suspicions about the math teacher in my marriage counseling session with Martin, and I stacked my son's mail on his desk in his room for him to look through when he came home. I hope he makes it home before Thanksgiving. I tell myself I left Heath for his own good, for myself, for my husband, for my son, even my school. In truth, I think I simply left him before he could leave me. I pray no one finds out, and when I lie awake at 3 a.m. and listen to Martin's breathing, I try not to think of Heath out in the world, legs overlapping a girl in a twin bed, coiled together practicing the moves I helped him learn. And in the morning, I try not to look too closely in the gilded mirror above my dresser, even as I smooth my hair and slip my feet into those damned high heels. And that's it.